Nalu FM Finance Podcast. Insight into the financial markets.
The human approach and the wise approach and the enriching approach is to see engagement with other cultures, other self-understandings as a source of learning for oneself. And through that, we will be better placed to confront the common challenges.
This podcast is courtesy of the Zurich branch of Commerzbank AG, which offers over 20,000 publicly offered leveraged structured products in Switzerland. These structured products are accessible through a multitude of channels, including the BX, SIX exchanges, and Swissquote Bank. More information can be found at certificate.commerzbank.ch.
Stephen Green was educated at Lancing College, Sussex, and at Oxford University, where he graduated in 1969 with a BA in politics, philosophy, and economics. He also obtained a master's degree in political science from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He was created a life peer in 2010 and was appointed Minister of State for Trade and Investments in 2011. He retired from this position in December 2013. Lord Green began his career in 1970 with the British government Ministries of Overseas Development. In 1977, he joined Mackenzie & Co., with whom he undertook assignments in Europe, North America, and the Middle East. He joined the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation in 1982. In 1998, he was appointed to the board of HSBC Holdings plc as an executive director. He became Group Chief Executive in 2003 and Group Chairman in 2006. He retired from HSBC in December 2010. Lord Green is currently the Chairman of the National History Museum, Chairman of the Asia House, and President of the Institute of Export and International Trade. Thank you, Stephen, for taking the time. So, after the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, you published the book Good Value, which I really enjoyed, and it was sort of a reflection on money, morality in an uncertain world. Now, your latest book is The Human Odyssey, East, West, and the Search for Universal Values. What influenced you to write that book?
Well, it was, in a sense, a distillation of a lifetime spent partly doing business and living in Asia, and partly kind of voracious reading, as my wife says. If she turns her back, I'm reading a book, and there's an element of truth in that. In a sense, that book tries to bring together my sense of what's going on. I mean, it's a ridiculously ambitious project, but I enormously enjoy doing it. And it starts from a simple thesis, really, which is that we all live on the continent of Eurasia, the landmass that extends from Ireland in one direction to Vladivostok in the other. That's about 2/3 of the world's population, and it's about 2/3 of the world's economic output. And as connectivity increases, both physical and virtual, so we're becoming more and more aware of each other, and in the process becoming more and more aware of the fact that Eurasia is home and origin to all of the world's great living cultures. And as they bump up against each other, it is interesting to explore, to say the least. It's important to explore how we are dealing with different senses of self-awareness, different senses of what's important. What does this mean in commerce, for sure, but actually more generally, what does it mean for human life, the fact that we're all coming together in that way? So I tried to explore where we'd got to and what it might look like over the next 100 years. Because in that context, the big question geopolitically on the world stage is the rise of China and the way in which the other great superpower of the world, America, America is going to deal with that, and how they're going to interact with each other, and what does that mean for the rest of us. So, like I say, a ridiculously ambitious project, but fascinating to do.
Coming back to the book and also your previous book that I mentioned, the Good Value, morality seems to be sort of an essential aspect of your book. One example also that is a big project, obviously, is China's Belt and Road Initiative. Will bring many opportunities. Investors are looking on it. How do you see should investors incorporate their values if they particularly not agree with where they potentially could invest in?
Well, that's a very difficult question.
I know, sorry. That's why I'm asking it, because I'm not myself struggle with that.
It's also a very important one. because first, A, no country is perfect. B, we do have to recognize significant cultural differences in perspective on the world. C, in the case of China, we have to recognize, before you get into any of the specific sensitive issues, you have to recognize that this is a civilization with a 3, 4, 5,000 year history behind it, and a very rich culture of thought and aesthetics, both in art and in literature and in music. And a self-understanding which has always seen itself as, in a sense, the center of the world. Famously, the name of China means Middle Kingdom, Central Kingdom, and it's a country which has taken its place again on the world stage, and again is an important word, over the last 30, 40 years, because of the reforms and the opening up, which Deng Xiaoping started in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and that has put an end in their minds to a sense to a period of victimization. They see themselves as coming out of a 200-year period when they were victimized by Western imperial powers, Britain, among, not least, but perhaps Japan most of all, because it wasn't not only the West, and that gives China a certain self-understanding that it's important to understand, empathize with, come to terms with, because the fact is that China is going to be one of the two great powers on the world stage for the rest of this century. The Belt and Road Initiative, that's China's foreign policy going global. And you can track the evolution of the Chinese engagement with the rest of the world from the death of Mao onwards, through Deng Xiaoping, who famously said that China should keep a low profile and bide its time, through to where we are now, where President Xi talks in the UN and in Davos and in other sorts of contexts about China being a participant in a community of nations dedicated to finding the fair way forward for all humanity and such like. And this isn't just rhetoric, this is China going global. Belt and Road Initiative has got many aspects to it. It's partly I think a genuine interest in opening up trade and commercial links for the benefit of all, mutual benefit. It's clearly got some geostrategic benefits as well. It clearly creates market opportunities for investors. It's a complex thing because China's a complex country, and its emergence on the world stage is the most important factor this century.
You also, in your book that you wrote a lot in Eurasia, you mentioned, how much everybody has gone into the city now. Basically, more than half of the population now lives in cities. Do you think that this trend could reverse, and potentially with the current situation we're finding ourselves with COVID or a pandemic in general, living that close together is not a good idea in an environment like this? And technology, I would hope will make it more easier to work outside the city.
Well, moving from London to Starnberg is a good example of the point.
That's hence where the question was coming from.
My journey's in a sense been opposite. I grew up in a small village, but I've lived all my adult life in big cities, in Hong Kong, here, in London, in New York, actually in Riyadh. Lived a year in Riyadh too. So I've lived in big cities. I think the honest answer is that it's too soon to tell what the impact of COVID-19 will be. It will change our view of the way we relate to each other and some of our work practices. We will do more of virtual communication, I'm sure, less flying.
I could imagine that COVID-19 will do more for the technology strategy of companies than anything else has ever done before.
Well, it's certainly causing an awful lot of people to figure out how they're going to communicate when they're self-isolating. Will this overall affect the trend towards urbanization? I don't think so. Actually, the numbers are against it, apart from anything else. This will pass. We will get through it and back to a more normal form of life. Even though I think that will have been impacted, it'll be a long time before the consciousness will have lost the sense of what it was like to live through a pandemic. Nevertheless, the world's full of close to 8 billion people now, and we can't go back to an earlier time when 80% of the people lived and worked on the land and got their living from the land. We can't do that. So there's no way that you can significantly reverse the trend of urbanization. And in fact, I believe the trends will continue in the same direction. At the moment, Europe is over 80% urbanized. Asia is still less than 60% urbanized. There's no reason to believe that Asia won't head in the same direction. Africa, of course, is even further behind.
Yeah.
No, I don't think that trend is called into question by COVID-19. And it does have all kinds of impacts on human self-awareness, societal relationships, and, of course, an impact on the planet through degradation of the environment and pollution of the atmosphere.
In your book, you describe a lot of historical and also potential future changes. Is there certain things you think that will stay the same?
Well, there's an interesting question. I want to answer, of course, the answer is yes, because I think there are some underlying, probably many levels of an answer to that. But the important one for me is that there are underlying commonalities about human experience that are timeless and, in a sense, not culture bound. And one of the most fun parts of that book that I had, as far as writing it was concerned, was exploring those commonalities across cultures and across time, as expressed in the literature of the Europeans, the Islamic world, China, India, Japan, and so on. And what you find is that when you deal with human expressions of joy, sadness, loss and death, the sense of transience generally, those kinds of instincts, no, they haven't changed. My favorite example, and I quote this in the book, is of a Tang Dynasty poet in China, so that's 1200 years ago, writing a little poem on the death of his own 3-year-old daughter. It's a very moving little poem. It describes how he follows the coffin out into the fields where the little coffin is buried, and how he goes back home and he looks at her empty bed with the medicine bag still hanging from the side, and is conscious of her loss. This could have been written in anywhere at any stage, and there's no reason to believe that kind of experience of life is going to change.
I agree. Another point is that obviously there's a lot of fault lines in Eurasia, and when I looked at it, when I read your book, the first thing, sadly, that triggered me to look at was that literally 8 out of the 9 countries that have nuclear weapons are located in Eurasia, and not all of them are very friendly to each other. I live in Europe. I feel, Europe will be caught between the US, potentially Russia for energy, and China. Maybe not so much India, but how could this play out for them? And particularly if NATO doesn't hold up, with the US their commander-in-chief making noises accordingly to it, I even fear that other countries could look into getting a nuclear deterrent. When you were writing your book, were you thinking about this or have any view on that?
I think you put your finger on something extremely important. As you say, 8 out of 9 nuclear powers, nuclear power, varying stages of nuclear capability, of course, but 8 out of the 9 are in Eurasia, and the 9th, of course, which is the US, is heavily engaged in Eurasia.
Yeah.
So you could say that all of the world's nuclear powers are heavily engaged in Eurasia. And as you said so delicately, some of them are at loggerheads with each other. We used to talk when you were thinking of risk, and you were thinking in your world of risk management in finance. When I was thinking of it, you thought of the various forms of risks. And I remember somebody talking about the possibility of a pandemic 10 years ago, and probably longer than that, actually, even before SARS, which was our first break with a pandemic in recent times. I remember somebody saying, "Could this be the next big thing?" And that thought being poo-pooed by others, saying, "No, come on, in this day and age, medicine and all that." Well, now we know how sinister a pandemic really can be. Well, nuclear power is another one. It's kind of gone off the radar screen to some extent. Those of us who remember the 1960s well, will remember the fear of a significant nuclear war between Russia and America.
Yeah, we practiced to get under the table at school, literally.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah.
I did too. I remember my parents. I remember the Cuba crisis and I was a boy at the time, but I can remember looking at my parents, looking for kind of assurance, and you could see from the expressions on their face that they weren't at all sure how that would, whether that might not lead to a real disaster. So nuclear proliferation is still a big risk that we ought to be concerned about, and there are countries that have nuclear capabilities and have significant geopolitical rivalries or ambitions, yeah. So no, I think it's it's a concern we should never forget.
And another one, a little bit, I think, where the big powers are competing is artificial intelligence, and learning and retaining that learning through artificial intelligence obviously extremely can be accelerated. Did you think about what approaches the different countries? I mean, the US has a very different approach. The US has the approach, we leave it up to the private sector. In China, it's very much government driven. And again, the rest of Europe, let's ignore Russia for the time, is sort of a little bit at loss, I find. At least I don't find there's any proper strategy. And again, they find themselves in the middle. Whose technology do we choose? Not only in telecommunications that we have it, but how do we choose?
Yeah, well, a couple of aspects to that. Artificial intelligence is clearly going to change the world a lot over the next few decades. It's going to change economic activity. It's going to hollow out certain aspects of economic employment. It's going to remove the first stage of development for many countries as they open up. I mean, China and much of the rest of Asia started on the road of economic development by being the source of cheap labor for goods that were then sold in Europe and America and Japan. Artificial intelligence, taking the form, for example, of digital printing and an ever more sophisticated means of doing stuff remotely without human intervention, removes that opportunity for the next wave of countries in the early stages of economic development. It's not good news for Africa, for example. So that's one aspect of it. Another, of course, as a lot of us have noted, is it will remove some of, or not some of, probably quite a lot of middle management, office administration kind of roles. But overall, artificial intelligence should be seen as good news. This does enable human beings to leverage their own competence so much more, in the same way as previous technological revolutions have done. They have the capacity to be used for evil purposes as well as for good, but the basic fact is that they leverage the human being enormously. So this is good news for us, but it's also very challenging good news, and we're in the very early stages of how it will play out.
This is a little bit of a personal question from my side, probably driven by it, because you pointed out many future challenges are coming up, and I always think to myself, I can sit on the sideline, watch the news, and commentate on it. But if I want to be part of the solution and not just commentating from the sidelines, how should one get involved in the sense? Is it politics? Is it supporting a specific person? And I don't know. You chose multiple routes in a sense.
Yeah, I don't think there's a single answer to that question. I think if we start from a perspective that we want to make a difference, you want to improve conditions for humanity, you're not going to be able to boil the ocean. It's given to very few people to make historic changes in life, and very few people indeed. But all of us have the opportunity to do some things, and they can be near or far, and they can be in different areas of human endeavour. And media, finance, the whole range of activity. All of that can be seen under the aegis of a perspective that wants to make a contribution to the common good. I don't think there's any great mystery about that. It is, of course, sometimes challenging. It's challenging because there are surely some areas of activity which are very difficult to reconcile with any meaningful definition of the common good. And if you're engaged in that, you have to ask, well, why am I doing? Well, why I've got one life? Why am I using it for that? And it's also challenging because none of us are perfect. So none of us are going to get it right all of the time or do it as well as we could. We're all going to get distracted by baser motives. That's, I'm afraid, a reality of the human condition. But I don't treat that as a reason to be pessimistic about the opportunities that we all face. And we all face them at whatever stage of life we find ourselves. I'm distinctly a has-been as far as the banking world is concerned. I've been out of it for coming up 10 years. And I've done a few things since. I do the things that at least I try to do, the things that look as though they're that are making a contribution.
Yeah.
And do I get this right all the time? I'm sure not. But I think we've all got the opportunity at whatever stage of life we are at to ask ourselves that question.
And last question, and that's sort of a question I pretty much ask anybody for any interview, and it's a little bit sort of a fun question. It's my fun question. Is what is your favorite up to 3 finance movies?
Well, you you gave me notice of this. I should own up, and I find it very difficult to answer. Wall Street, of course, was an impressive movie, and The Bonfire of the Vanities is another one. Actually, I thought my favourite. If I was sent to a desert island, I was allowed to take a book or a film.
Yes.
So I'm teaching really as a book or a film on this subject with me. The book I would take is Trollope's The Way We Live Now, which is set in the 19th century, needless to say, because that's when he lived. I think it's the best book he wrote, and it tells you all you need to know about the way in which money and dealing and sort of contaminate human relationships. It's a very powerful book, and it's in a sense, in one sense, of course, it's very much a book of the 19th century. In another sense, it's time that you can read it and say, gosh, I recognize these instincts, these behavior patterns right now.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to look this book up. I am not aware of that one.
I suppose I'll tell you what I would like to just reflect on. This book that I've just written, whose subtitles East, West, and the Search for Universal Values, this is a pervasive concern for all of us, of course, is what is it that unites us as we face common challenges? And we all know what the headlines, at any rate, what the big challenges are. And of course, above all, we're living at the moment through a pandemic, but I think more on a longer term basis, the big issue is clearly climate change, environmental degradation, and so forth. The connection with that and urbanization we've already talked about. But how do we discover the common values, the common approaches that are going to enable us to confront those challenges on a cohesive basis? So is, to me, the big question of our time. And this is really the point I want to make, you discover those values, what you really think is important, by engaging with others. And indeed, you discover a sense of who you really are by engaging with others. And learning about them, recognizing what they have to contribute to an understanding of the big issues of the world. So this is not a matter of, in any simple way, of lecturing the rest of the world on the basis of European values. It is a matter of a journey of self-discovery where we discover what is really important through engagement with others. The alternative of seeing the great issue between America and China as one of confrontation, seeing that as being a task of containment of a new and threatening alternative way of doing things, is a recipe in the end for disaster. The human approach and the wise approach and the enriching approach is to see engagement with other cultures, other self-understandings as a source of learning for oneself, and through that we will be better placed to confront the common challenges.
Nalu FM Finance Podcast. Insight into the financial markets.
This podcast is courtesy of the Zurich branch of Commerzbank AG, which offers over 20,000 publicly offered leverage structured products in Switzerland. These structured products are accessible through a multitude of channels, including the BX, SIX exchanges, and Swissquote Bank. More information can be found at certificate.commerzbank.ch.